You ever get that feeling like you just want to reread a favorite book or rewatch a movie you love or even head back to a vacation spot that just felt right?
Yeah, definitely. It's more than just nostalgia, though, right?
Right. Like, what is it about those familiar experiences, even when you know exactly what's going to happen, you still want to go back?
That's what got us thinking for this deep dive.
Yeah.
And the AI we spoke with, it had a really cool take on this, especially when it comes to books.
Okay, yeah, let's break that down. So we've fed the AI a ton of research articles all about rereading,
Hmm.
and it came back with some pretty wild insights.
Yeah.
One of the first things that kind of hit me was this idea that our understanding of a book, it actually evolves every time we reread it.
It's like, when you visit a city for the first time,
Okay,
you're
yeah.
just blown away by the scale of it all, the landmarks, the crowds, all that energy.
Wow, totally.
But then you go back a second time and you start to notice the smaller details, the little hidden alleyways, the local spots, the things that actually make the city what it is.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that when we reread a book, we're basically becoming more like locals in that world, picking up on the things we missed on that first like whirlwind tour.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that the AI, and it's analyzed like millions of text, reader responses, all that,
Wow.
it actually found a pattern here. It's not just that we're more familiar with the story, it's that we've changed as readers.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we're always changing, evolving, gathering new experiences. It would be kind of weird if that didn't affect how we understand a book.
Right. Like all of those life experiences, big milestones, even just everyday interactions, it all adds this new lens to how we view the characters and their motivations.
So it's almost like you have like a built-in book club, right?
Uh-huh.
You get to see the story from your past self's point of view, but also your current self's.
I like that. And it's not just our personal experiences either. Even our intellectual growth, like in totally different areas, can totally change how we see a book. Like the AI gave this really interesting example. Imagine you read a historical novel,
Right. Okay.
and then later on, completely separately, you learn more about economics.
I think I see where you're going with this.
Yeah,
Suddenly, you might see all those historical figures and the decisions they made and the politics and social dynamics in a whole new light.
exactly. It's like those seemingly insignificant details suddenly just click into place. And you realize there was so much more going on beneath the surface.
It's like when you learn a new word and then you start seeing it everywhere. But in this case, it's like a whole new layer of meaning in the book you thought you knew.
Totally. It shows how rereading can become this incredibly dynamic process. Like the book itself almost becomes a conversation partner. You're not just passively reading it anymore.
So you're not just absorbing the information, you're actually engaging with it.
You got it. The AI really stressed that rereading actually puts us in a position to have a dialogue with the author, to challenge their ideas, to test them against our own evolved worldview.
Wait, so you're saying rereading can actually be like a form of dissent?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because by rereading with a critical eye, with all this new knowledge and experience, we might find ourselves disagreeing with the author in ways we didn't before. We might spot flaws in their arguments, question their assumptions, maybe even reject their conclusions completely.
That's a really cool concept. Like, it makes you realize that rereading isn't just about revisiting this comfortable story. It's about challenging yourself intellectually, sharpening your own thinking.
Absolutely. And the AI actually pointed to some research on this. Like studies have shown that when readers are encouraged to reread a text, specifically looking for things to disagree with, they get way better at analytical thinking. They get better at forming their own counter-arguments.
So it's not just about understanding the author's point of view, it's about developing your own unique point of view.
Yes, it's like any muscle you have to exercise it to keep it strong. And rereading with that critical lens, that's like a mental workout for your critical thinking skills.
I love that analogy. It's like turning this passive activity into an active form of learning and growth.
And you remember that city analogy from before?
Yeah, about noticing those hidden details the second time around.
Right. Well, the AI took it a step further with this thought experiment. Imagine two people both reading a 10-chapter book.
Okay.
One person stops halfway through and rereads chapter 1.
Right.
The other person finishes the whole book and then rereads chapter 1.
Okay, I'm curious. What's the difference?
Their understanding of that first chapter is going to be completely different.
Oh, interesting.
The person who only read half the book is experiencing that chapter in isolation.
Right.
But the person who finished the book has the full context.
Uh-huh.
They see how that first chapter sets up the entire story. They understand the foreshadowing, the little hints that point toward the ending.
Wow, that's such a good point. It makes you realize how much our understanding of even like a small piece of information is shaped by that larger context.
And here's where it gets even cooler. The AI suggested that this principle, it applies not just to books, but to life in general.
Oh, so like the more we learn and experience, the better equipped we are to understand everything around us, even the stuff we thought we already knew.
Exactly. It's like we're constantly collecting these puzzle pieces, and as we get more of them, we're able to create this clearer, more complete picture of the world.
Okay, so we talked about how our understanding changes over time, how we get these multiple perspectives, even how rereading can be a form of dissent.
Mhm.
But the AI also mentioned something about fresh inspiration, like how rereading can actually help us come up with new ideas or solve problems in our own lives.
That's right. The AI explained that rereading can act as a catalyst for problem solving. It's like our subconscious is working in the background, making connections between the book's ideas and the challenges we're dealing with day to day.
So even if you're rereading like a fantasy novel, it could spark an idea for your work project.
Yeah. Totally possible. Our brains are amazing at making those unexpected connections. And by revisiting familiar stories, familiar ideas, we open ourselves up to new insights,
Yeah.
to these creative breakthroughs. And this is where I think we should transition to the next part of our conversation.
Okay, I'm hooked. How do we actually unlock that potential? How do we do it?
That's what we're going to dive into next. It's all about understanding the power of rereading,
Yeah.
but then also knowing how to actually harness it.
Sounds good to me. All right, so we know that rereading isn't just about like reliving the story. It's about actually engaging with it,
Yeah.
letting our more evolved selves have a conversation with the text. But how do we make sure we're really getting the most out of that conversation? What are some like practical tips?
Well, think about it this way. If you were going back to that city we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
you wouldn't just wander around aimlessly, right?
Right.
You probably have a plan, some places you want to see, neighborhoods you want to explore. Rereading is kind of like that too.
So we need a roadmap, a strategy for our rereading journey.
Yeah, exactly. And the AI actually had some pretty good tips for this.
Yeah.
One approach is to really think about the books you choose. Like, are there books that really had a huge impact on you at a certain point in your life?
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe something you read during a tough time,
Yeah.
or one that like sparked some big personal change.
That makes sense because if you reread those books now, you've got hindsight, right?
Hmm.
Emotional distance. It could give you a completely different perspective on those experiences, almost like you're talking to your past self.
That's it.
Yeah.
You might be surprised at what really hits you now, what passages jump out at you, how your take on it has changed over time.
Yeah. And maybe some stuff that seemed so profound back then, now it seems kind of naive or even a bit simplistic.
That happens. It's all part of that evolving
Yeah.
understanding, right? And it's not just about the past either. The AI also talked about choosing books that connect with what you're into right now or even challenges you're facing. Like say you're struggling with a tough decision or trying to learn a new skill.
You're saying I could reread a book about decision making or that specific skill, even if it's not something I'd usually read just for fun.
Exactly. Might sound a little weird, but the idea is to look at familiar material with a totally new goal in mind. Your brain's going to naturally start making those links between the book's ideas and the situation you're in.
I like that. It's like turning your bookshelf into a toolbox for life.
Uh-huh. That's a great way to put it. And there's actually one more strategy the AI suggested that I thought was really cool.
Okay, tell me.
Don't be afraid to go back to books that you didn't really like the first time.
Wait, really? Why would I do that?
Our tastes change,
Hmm.
our perspectives. And a book that maybe bored you years ago, it might actually surprise you now. Could be really relevant or have a depth you didn't see before.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think we all have those books we kind of wrote off. Maybe we weren't ready for them or didn't have the right background. Maybe it's time for a second chance.
Right. It's all about coming at rereading with that open mind, that curiosity. You might be surprised what you find.
So how do we make sure we're actually having that conversation with the text? Because we can't just sit there and like passively absorb the words like we did the first time.
Right. Well, the AI talked about a few techniques that can make a big difference. And one of the easiest, but like most powerful ones, is active reading.
Active reading, so like not just skimming through, but really, really taking it in.
Exactly. There are some practical things you can do. Highlighting or underlining parts that really resonate with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great way to mark those moments of, insight or connection. Or even like jotting down notes in the margins. Maybe you have a question or reflection, even if you disagree with something.
Yeah.
That forces you to really think it through and have that conversation with the author.
I love that. It's like turning the book into this conversation piece you can keep coming back to. You can see how your thoughts have changed.
Yeah. And honestly, don't underestimate the power of just like pausing every so often.
Yeah.
Just to think about what you've read. Ask yourself, what really stood out in this chapter? Or how has my view of this character changed?
Yeah.
What connections can I make to my own life or to other things I've learned?
It's like taking a moment to just savor it, let it sink in, which is something we don't often do when we're just trying to speed through a book.
Totally. And speaking of taking our time, another technique the AI brought up was spaced retrieval.
Space retrieval. Is that like when I lose my phone in the couch cushions?
Haha, not quite, though. I've definitely done that too. Space retrieval is basically the idea that we remember things better when we revisit them over time, not just cramming it all at once.
So instead of rereading a book in one go, I should maybe spread it out over a few weeks or even months.
That's the idea. And the AI mentioned this is especially helpful for remembering complex stuff or those subtle arguments. By spacing out your rereading, you give your brain time to actually digest it all, make connections, and really solidify those memories.
Okay, so active reading, space retrieval, anything else in this rereading toolbox?
Well, there's one more that I think is super powerful, and it's actually something we can do together.
Ooh, a team effort. I like it. Tell me more.
It's called shared rereading, and it basically means discussing a book with other people who are also rereading it. Could be friends, family, a book club, even online groups that are dedicated to certain authors or genres.
So it's kind of like that built-in book club we talked about before, but with actual people this time.
Exactly. And by sharing our thoughts and perspectives and asking each other questions, we understand the book in ways we couldn't on our own.
I love that. Like everyone brings a different piece of the puzzle, and together you get this richer, more complete picture of the book.
And it's not just about hearing new viewpoints. Shared rereading also helps us to really articulate our own thoughts, challenge what we believe, and see the book through totally different lenses.
That's a really cool idea. It shows that rereading doesn't have to be this solitary thing. It can be this like communal experience, you know?
Yeah.
It builds connection, you learn together, and you grow.
Exactly. And it gets back to that deeper purpose we were talking about. Rereading isn't just about going back to a familiar story. It's
Yeah.
about actively engaging with ideas and letting our understanding keep evolving.
Okay, so we covered a lot. We talked about choosing books with purpose, active reading, spacing things out, and even the shared rereading thing.
Hmm.
Any last bits of wisdom for our listeners who are ready to like dive into their own rereading adventures?
I think the main thing is to just have fun with it. Be curious.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different approaches. See what works for you.
Yeah, and don't forget to enjoy it. It shouldn't feel like a chore.
Absolutely. And remember, the goal isn't to like master the book or have all the answers. It's about having that conversation, letting your understanding change, and rediscovering something you thought you knew.
I like that a lot. But I gotta ask, what about you? What book are you planning on revisiting with all these new tools and everything?
That's a great question. And I think it's actually a perfect lead-in to our last part of the conversation today,
Ooh, I like it.
where we share some of our own experiences, maybe inspire our listeners to go on their own rereading journeys.
Awesome. Let's do it. All right, so we've talked about all the tools and techniques for rereading, but now I'm curious about you. What book are you thinking of revisiting with fresh eyes and all that?
Well, there's this one science fiction book I read a while back, just blew me away.
Yeah.
It really dug into these deep questions about AI and like, what does it even mean to be human?
Interesting.
But back then, I was just a teenager, totally caught up in the tech and the action.
Right, right.
So now I'm like, what would it be like to read it again? With everything I've learned since then.
Okay. So what makes you want to go back to it? What do you think will be different this time?
I've learned so much about AI since I first read it. Not just the science part, but also like the ethical stuff,
Uh-huh.
the philosophical questions it brings up. I really want to see how all that new understanding will change how I experience the story.
That's really cool. It's like the book hasn't changed, but you're bringing a whole new you to the table.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm a little nervous. What if I don't love it as much as I did back then?
Yeah.
What if my like teenage self was just, I don't know, obsessed with the surface and
Yeah.
now I see all the flaws?
But isn't that part of the fun, discovering that a book can still surprise you, even challenge you, maybe even disappoint you a little?
Yeah.
doesn't that mean you've grown?
Yeah, you're right. Maybe that's the big takeaway here.
Yeah.
Rereading isn't about being stuck in the past or trying to feel exactly the same way you did before.
Right.
It's about, like, accepting that our understanding changes, that our tastes and views change.
And who knows, maybe you'll love it even more now, but for completely different reasons.
That's what I'm hoping for. To find that magic again, but also discover whole new layers of meaning that I couldn't have gotten back then.
Okay, I gotta know. What's the book? What's this mind-blowing sci-fi that has you so hyped to reread it?
It's called A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge. Heard of it?
Yeah, it rings a bell. It's a classic, right?
Hmm.
I actually haven't read it myself, but now I'm definitely intrigued.
You should definitely check it out. It's a bit dense,
Okay.
but so worth it if you're willing to put in the time.
Well, you've officially added it to my list. And hey, maybe after we've both had a chance to, experience it again with fresh eyes, we could do a follow-up episode, compare notes.
I would love that. It would be so interesting to see how, like, our different backgrounds and perspectives shape how we each understand the story.
And hey, maybe we could even invite our listeners to join us on this whole rereading journey.
Ooh, yeah.
Could be a fun way to, build a community around shared learning and just exploring ideas together.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
We could have a virtual book club, share thoughts, debate the big questions, see how our collective understanding evolves.
I'm already excited. But for now, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered so much today, from the science of why our understanding changes to the actual strategies for active rereading and even that potential for like a shared journey with others.
Yeah, it's been a really enlightening conversation.
It really has. And I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to maybe dust off their bookshelves, revisit some favorites with a new perspective.
Yeah.
Who knows what hidden gems or new insights await?
And remember, the whole journey of understanding, it never really ends.
Yeah, trail
It's always evolving, rediscovering, and rereading. Well, that's one of the best ways to keep that journey going.
So well said. Until next time, everyone, happy rereading.